This podcast is brought to you by JAM, Junction Arts and Media, building community in the Upper Valley through media.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Going to Dismas. I'm your host, Jeff Backus, the Director of Development for Dismas of Vermont. Today I have with me Jonathan from the Restorative Justice Center and Lucas, a current resident of Hartford Dismas House. Let's start with Jonathan. Can you just give a brief overview of what the Restorative Justice Center does and the concepts behind what restorative justice is?
Sure. So at the Hartford Community Restorative Justice Center, we offer a number of services, all focused really, if I had to say that there's one common denominator, it's relationship building. Relationship building with the community, with families, between individuals and themselves. Restorative justice, all of our programs are meant to add a balance to our legal system. And as I've already said, the biggest difference between us and the legal system is that when a harm is caused, we look at what happened, what was the human part of that, not so much what's the legal part, going back. But who was harmed? How was the community affected? How were you as an individual affected? And how can we as an organization help create a way for you to mend those relationships, repair the harm with the community, and move forward with your life? We also have for me specifically, I run our transitional housing program, similar to Dismas in that we offer transitional housing, different in that it's spread out through individual apartments in the community. We don't own our apartments, but we provide space for individuals who are justice involved. Some of them have been incarcerated. When we first started out, I would say the majority of our clientele came directly from prison. Now we may get individuals who are already in the community but struggling. And again, that's where we offer housing as part of a program. So you're not getting your own apartment. To be part of the program, you have to agree to take the steps to take responsibility for the harm that was caused, really take a close look at who was affected by your behavior. And most importantly, for our volunteers and our clients, is the belief that you can change. Everybody can change. And change is difficult.
So the whole premise behind restorative justice is to move away from being punitive and punishing those, who break the law. And even furthermore, the people who are imposing those punishments are, the court system and such. And it's not so much those who are affected. I mean, is that fair to say? If those affected had some say in what repairing the harm done would be, that'd be more ideal.
Yeah. Yep. I would say that's right. I mean, the justice system, the legal system as it is, one of the things I've come to appreciate is that many times the offending party, the offender for lack of a better term, and the victim may not have contact again. There's not a chance for reconciliation, a chance for an individual for a victim to say how they were truly affected. How did this really affect you? Once the legal system steps in, you almost lose the victim voice. And restorative justice allows the victim voice to come forward in a way and say, hey, I was affected this way. And for the offender to come forward and say, sorry. Lots of times I have found, and what I love about restorative justice is that, like you said, the legal system is about punitive. The restorative justice system is about finding that balance, moving beyond the punitive, but change. And I have found that most people, when they come through our program or are incarcerated, it may be the first time that they've really come to appreciate how their behaviors have affected others, and that by and large, people are sorry for the harm that they have caused. And restorative justice then helps provide a way for them to move beyond the worst thing that they may have ever done and become the person that they want to be, that has always been in there. Help connect them to the programs that can help them become that better person. And along the way, what I've noticed is that for victims, when they see someone doing better, moving away from the person that caused them harm, it brings a calm to their life. It brings a peace to them. It gives them a voice, and it creates a space for an offender and a victim to come together and heal that relationship.
All right, Lucas, let's give a brief introduction to yourself. Where are you from? Where are you? Where are you going? What do you want us to know?
I'm Lucas Brown. I was born in Randolph, Vermont. I lived just over the mountain in Rochester, Hancock, Granville Valley for my entire life up until my arrest in 2019. It's a very rural area. If you don't have a marketable skill, if you don't do construction or work for one of the other companies there or maybe be a cashier, you're pretty well out of luck as far as work unless you have transportation somewhere. It's like, it's very hard living. And we had one big factory that, the town thrived on for generations. And then when that went out, it's kind of a ghost town, but I enjoy it. It's a hard living. It's just what I know and what I like. I got arrested in 2019 for a domestic assault. I spent 3 years in jail out of a 4-year sentence, was released December 20th to Dismas House, where I've been residing since. And I'm here with you today, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable elaborating on the circumstances of your offense, what you were charged with? And then maybe in the future we can apply some restorative justice concepts to his story.
Well, to begin with, I have struggled with addiction and to alcohol and various other substances pretty much my entire adult life. I started smoking weed when I was 13 or 14, and that quickly turned into eating shrooms and drinking, but not as a full-time addiction. It was just stuff we did, but it was fun. I had a good time doing it. I didn't really have too many bad experiences out of it because I was very cautious and always worried mom was going to catch me, so I had to keep it in check. And I did well in school too, so I had good grades. There was no reason to suspect anything, and I was just doing well. This all leads into my whole life, basically. One pretty big thing that happened, and that was just how I grew up, doing stuff like that. My parents separated when I was young. I always had a connection with my dad though, and with him and my mom and my stepfather, who had been there as long as I can remember as well. We still all had a good relationship, they would, if my mom and stepdad needed something, construction stuff done on their land, they would pay my dad to do it just to, keep the money in the family, basically. And my dad ended up getting cancer and dying, and that screwed me up pretty bad. He was my good friend, and I started partying pretty hard, got addicted to crystal meth, was into that for a couple years, and luckily escaped the addiction without any criminal consequences. But it just rewired my brain. I was a different person after those 2 years of doing it, pretty well nonstop. It just changed me. I can't even explain it. It's like I'm a different person. When I was dealing with the withdrawal effects from that, the burden that it is, if you're not an addict and you've never been through it, there's no way to, there's no possible way to relate to it. Withdrawal is something crazy, and meth's not even the worst one. And then you get into opiates. To deal with the effects from that, I started drinking pretty hard and partying with people socially, and I've also always kind of struggled with social anxieties. I don't like crowds. I'm an independent people. I'm fine if I have, I'm out in the woods with my 2 dogs. I don't care if I see a soul, other than, maybe family and a few close friends and stuff. But other than that, I don't have people over. I don't go to parties very often unless it's approved people. But I had plenty of them to party with it when I wanted them as well. They just led on for years and years and years. And then I met a girl actually over a transaction, and we just started hanging out, and she did drugs, but very recreationally, not very often, just kind of something to do at a party. But there was just an instant attraction. We hung out one night, stayed in contact. That woman ended up becoming the victim of my crime that led me to prison or jail. That was a rocky relationship from the beginning, very toxic. Instantly became about partying together instead of just being together and trying to do stuff. It was every time we had ever met and hung out and whatever, it was always using. And then it became she ended up coming to my apartment and basically living there at least a few days a week. And, it just got to a point where I did some things that I'm sorry for, but I can't take back. And that's had, negative effects, not only on, her just physically. I caused physical harm, but I'm sure there's lasting emotional harm. I haven't had any contact to talk with her, and I'm just trying to leave her alone. I've caused her enough harm, basically, but I'm hopeful that she's found, some peace in that. And I don't even want forgiveness. I just hope she's all right, and that she can recover from that. But, and I don't even know, I can't even come up and imagine the collateral damage that it caused her family, and, having added support and worry and whatever traumatizing them as well. As it's just like this one poor decision. And again, I don't know if I was doing any drugs. I had been drinking a little bit. I'd had a couple beers on the ride home from work. Some circumstances I don't really want to try to explain led to my arrest. Went to jail, and I was going to try to go to trial, and then there was just reasons I ended up taking a plea deal. I decided I would take a 1 to 4 year, a minimum of 1 year to serve, 4 year max.
Can I cut in for a second? If we could step back for a minute to what you call the big event, the circumstances that led to your arrest and so forth. From a restorative justice perspective, we have a very obvious, clear-cut choice of who we need to mend the harm done with. What do you do in circumstances like this where contact isn't free-flowing or maybe unwanted? What would your approach be?
So we would reach out to the victim coordinator at the local probation and parole office for guidance to see specifically what are the rules around contact for Lucas and his victim. And if possible and appropriate, reach out to the victim and ask her how she was affected. What does she need to feel like amends has been made? Is she happy? As Lucas said, maybe she's like, you know what? I'm just glad that it's over. I'm glad we've moved past it. Maybe that's enough. There's also a letter bank that victims can send a letter to. So the state's pretty good. I mean, we have Megan Place here, who is just an outstanding victim services coordinator, who we make victims aware of the letter bank. And usually that's already happened. So if she wanted to send Lucas a letter addressing how she feels about what happened, she would have the outlet to do that. We do, when we work with clients who are in Lucas's situation, I personally, when people come into the house, try to reach out to the victims or figure out if it's appropriate so we can ask that question. How were you affected? What do you need for amends? Do you want to have contact with this person? Is there a message you would like us to pass along?
And if in the circumstance that the victim does not want to proceed with the process and they're happy with where they are at, are there alternative choices that we could still pursue a restorative justice model?
Yeah, so really that's where we flip from. And I would say for me personally, the process then becomes looking at Lucas and really honing in on what led to that event. Because amends, I think a good part of amends can also be avoiding reoffense, like focus in on yourself and really put in the hard work, the difficult work to make sure that you don't end up in a position where, in this case, domestic abuse, where you're committing a violent act. So what needs to happen to make sure that doesn't happen? And that's where exploring your past, it's usually with the big event when people get arrested, there are so many smaller events that have happened before that. Small only being that maybe no one was caught. Maybe it started out as something legal. Maybe someone was high functioning with drugs or a maladaptive behavior for so long that it's not until, this, like Lucas describes this one event, it sounds like kind of a perfect storm comes together and then boom, something happens and you're arrested. I've come to appreciate that sometimes the arrest is just that flashpoint where things have blown up, but there's a history of behaviors that have led to that. And so, I run circles of support and accountability where I'll get volunteers together with someone and we meet with them for a year for 1 hour once a week to really just kind of help them move through and create a new decision-making process. So many of us so often are just running on autopilot. You have a way of being that you've adapted to that if you don't slow down and look at how you're handling situations, what's really going on in your life, if you don't have folks to slow down and say, actually, it is important to look at what are you doing? What have you been doing? Where do you want to go? Without having that kind of support, things can really get off the rails because sometimes without doing that work of figuring out, what do I want to do? I now talk in terms of why, how, and what. What's your reason for being? What's your why? If you focus on your why, that's a great way to make amends. Your life starts standing for something. So if a victim was to look forward and see an offender, what they would see is somebody who committed an act that caused them harm, but has now dedicated their life to creating change and becoming someone, I want to say someone better, someone who doesn't cause harm, someone who won't do that again. It had victims come forward who, have seen someone on the street that they didn't know was out and said, I heard they were working with you. I don't need to go and tell them this, but I just want to say I've really seen a change in them, and this is really great. So, thank you for whatever it is you've done, but it's And it's related to success. When people are successful and they have that reason for being, then you can figure out, like, how do you get there? What do you want to do for work? And then your what is the product. So
now this kind of brings me to my next point. Dismas and restorative justice pretty much has an interchangeable clientele. I mean, we've had people that have been in both places, and we've both experienced people not ready to accept accountability or, responsibility for their actions or their futures. Does this model only work if somebody's an active, willing participant? Or is there a way to work with somebody who's resisting and still make it work out in the long term?
One of the things that I really like about our local system and our relationship with Dismas is that, yes, someone has got to have a desire to change, right? I don't think I'm telling anybody anything new if I say you can't change someone else. The change has to come from within. Locally, what I really like, and I think we do well as Dismas House and the Justice Center with our housing, is we provide multiple opportunities for people to reach that point where they are ready to change. Sometimes someone will come to the Justice Center apartments and we have a high level of independence. People have to meet with me once a week to go over their goals. I inspect our apartments at random. Sometimes it's more than once a week, different hours. But where we vary greatly is people often live in a smaller apartment. It's there. They may or may not have a roommate. Some people thrive in that environment where they're ready for that level of independence. Sometimes they are not. And so they violate, they go back to jail. But if they're in our area or Hartford, Jeff, we've had experiences where we've been able to have a meeting with probation and parole and move someone from a Justice Center apartment to the Dismas House so that they can live with a larger group. There's more eyes on, there's a dinner, and that's a more appropriate place for people to start building their relationship with the community, to start rebuilding sometimes to learn to build relationships.
Now, this is a perfect segue to what I want to talk about next. So would you consider restorative justice scattered site housing as opposed to congregate housing where we have a group home at Dismas House? Scattered site housing model would be, apartments spread out. Yeah. That's what I would consider it. And I actually want to ask Lucas this first. For yourself, coming out of jail, do you think you would have functioned better in a Dismas-style home where 10 people plus minus live together in a group home, or a scattered site housing model where you have your own apartment, you may have a roommate or two, but you're mostly on your own? How would you see yourself functioning in each situation?
Because I'm very introverted and even antisocial lots of times, and even just resistant to meeting new people, I think if I was released into a place that was just I lived there and there was no forced reaction, I probably, in the long run, it would have been a harder living, but it may have forced me to keep me busy enough, things that I had to do, that would have, those obligations may have prevented other behaviors maybe. Or, I think either could have gone either way, but I would definitely say Dismas House was very beneficial because of all my resistance to that, to all that stuff. You guys really did a lot for me. As far as, for me at first it felt forced and it was uncomfortable and whatever, but now that I know everybody and a few of the guys that were there when I got there are still there, to this day, that I've gotten close with, and and then especially with all the support from the staff members with Jeff and Gail and Sam, you guys are great. As far as, when I got there that day, Gail had a list of places that would hire me sight unseen. Like, just, we need help, we'll hire you today. Like 10, 15 places right here locally. And I actually ended up coming over here to Big Fatty's and working for a few months. I was resistant to that even. I tried making a couple connections on my own, looking for work and whatever. And then I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to end up with the same or similar type job anyway. I might as well just use the lead. So I did, and it was great. Brandon's a good guy, the owner and operator there. He's a wicked good guy, and understanding of my circumstances, and the community as a whole was, very accepting. And I think that without all of that, as resistant as I am, it would have been hard for me. I would have been real busy working my ass off, living under the bare minimum, probably struggling.
You mentioned that you're very introverted, and I fielded this question a few times from volunteers because you generally don't eat at dinner. You're very quiet, reserved, and you just sit there. and everybody asks, is he okay? What's wrong with him? And more or less, my answer has been, no, he's fine. I mean, you just need to get to know him a little bit. What would the message you'd like to share with those volunteers? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, most of the time I'm fine. I mean, I can't lie, especially with my addiction issues. Sometimes there's stuff going on and I'm thinking a lot, but generally at the dinner table, I don't let my emotions affect what I'm doing a whole lot of the time. Because of all my struggles, I'm pretty good at, putting the feelings where they need to be. And, if I need to choke them down for a minute, I can. I got a good poker face and I'm used to struggling, so I can get through everything. So most of the time, nothing's bothering me. I'm usually in a pretty chipper mood, actually. I just don't want to talk to anybody. I'm just not a social person. It's very uncomfortable for me to have these casual conversations with especially the volunteers who I don't know. And I was that way with everybody when I first got there, including, Jeff and Sam and Gail and the other residents. And until I get to know them, and then I kind of open up, I'm more comfortable cracking jokes and, just saying, whatever, just having fun, getting along. I think that, I would just want to say to any, the people that ask that, yeah, I'm fine. I'm just, just try to give me a few minutes to get to know you. I'm kind of shy and I don't hate you. I won't bite and I'm all right.
And this goes even further because at Dismas, we have camping trips. We go in 2-3 times a year. And you were resistant initially to the idea, and many people are. I mean, it's a huge outside your comfort zone social experience with people that you're probably not entirely comfortable with. You're resistant to the idea. What was your experience once you got there?
It was good. I had a great time, actually. It was really good. I mean, it was a little hot, but it was good. That we bonded over the heat and the one little spot that, we would gather with the food and stuff and just sit there and, everybody sharing stories from the past and picking on each other, it's good camaraderie. And it's even some of the more abrasive relationships with certain people, that have come and gone. And, maybe all of us might not get along as good as a couple other guys do, or we may have a bit of an abrasive relationship, but it's still a very family feel. And I think that helps a lot too. And to know that there's that support, and especially through, my relapses and I don't know where I'd be. I'd probably still be going hard or having other charges, or it was easy for me to have years clean, before. And it's just right now. And I don't know how to explain it, I guess, but Dismas was definitely a good model for my needs.
Yeah. And you call it a family feel, and you put any 10 people, 10 family members, 10 strangers, any 10 people in a house, they're going to live there long term together. There's going to be trials and tribulations. There's going to be struggles. There's going to be bickering, and there's going to be good times. Backtracking a little bit to our housing models, we've gone back and forth on this, but how do you see the progression work best? Like a Dismas to restorative justice model, or all the way around, restorative justice to Dismas, or does it not even work that way?
Boy, it's interesting. So I have to say, I think you need both models in the community. I think, and what Lucas just said is something huge. I think if you've never experienced family, that going to Dismas, sitting down at dinner, going on those camping trips is life-changing. But in terms of what I prescribe, would I put a specific program in place, like you got to go here before you go here? I wouldn't. I think we do it right locally, where we have our meeting with probation and parole and we talk about people and their personalities. I do sometimes wish it could be a little more fluid or in people's plans, because I do think it's easy to look at some people and just say, okay, if we start them here, if for some of the folks we've had, I know they start at Dismas House. And what I really like is if you've got someone who's new to this area, they don't know where to get food, they are more reclusive and they isolate, food is taken care of. Community is coming to you at the Dismas House.
Yeah.
With the Justice Center, community's coming to you, but it's coming much slower. And the expectation from our program is more that you are at a place where you are coming to community. And so, does that make sense? Yeah. So I've seen people, the other thing I really like about Dismas House, where I've seen people be very successful with us and really reach that point where they are ready to come to the community, and they've moved beyond, needing the community to come to them, is the RA program, which I have actually with one of my current apartments with COVID. When I started having to extend people, I looked for an opportunity to put one of my clients in a position to essentially be an RA, because I have seen people respond so well to that at the Dismas House. And there are people who struggle, right? They may not be ready for it the first time they come.
I've had several failed attempts, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's great. You put that out there, and it's always struck me as one of those things where it's like, well, you can come back. Maybe you're not ready now. But that's what I like about it. And some of the folks who've moved in with us, I believe jail has its place. But in our community, with our options, what I really like is I would like that to be the last option. So if someone's not making it at the Justice Center, and the issue is, they really need a little more, they need to reach that point where they are reaching out. Not everybody is ready to live independently, or as independently as they can with us. We're able to take them and say, all right, there's an opening at Dismas. Go try this out. And that has worked really well. I've had people do really well at the Justice Center, and then there's a hiccup or something happens, and it's like they really do just need more community around them. And even if you don't feel like coming out of your room, if you know that there are 9 other people in that house and that it's an option, that feels a lot different than if you live alone and you're like, oh, I am alone. It's lonely and alone. And so I think it's a beautiful blend that we have here. I would not go with one. Sorry.
I personally feel that sense of community and that sense of belonging is my best tool to fight addiction issues. Somebody who feels like they're part of something, bigger than themselves, extends out to the community, seems more likely to succeed and have a healthy lifestyle than those left to themselves, reclusive, like you mentioned. And that's just been my personal experience. Well, what's your take on this? I know there's no obvious answer for managing opiate addiction. Do you have any suggestions, Lucas, that could help?
The best way I have come to explain it is like almost like a storm in my mind, or a war, and it's not always raging. Sometimes it's it's dormant, things are fine, and things aren't always bad when I'm using. Like, to be honest, I actually just enjoy being in an altered state a lot of the times, and I've just gotten so used to it that it's almost even part beyond addiction. Like, there's more to it. I've been working with psychologists and doctors and stuff, but I've thrived in both situations. And like, Dismas is nice, as like I touched on, as a family, but I don't mean to sound like I didn't have connections at home, because I have like massive family and support, but I choose to, create my own bubble where this is where I go isolate. That's my haven. When I want me time, I go there. If I need interaction, I seek it out. And that's still, I even do that at Dismas. Like, I know I make everybody worry. Everybody's always like, all right, man, I ain't been out of your room in 2 days. You came out and took a piss and went back in there. And it's, well, yeah, I have a mini fridge in there. I have like 40 bottles of water and some snacks.
We're just glad you came out of the room to go to the bathroom.
No, yeah. Just because I'm like, I'm locked away in my little spot, does, like, a lot of people assume that's probably when I'm using and shit, and it's pardon my language, but it's actually usually not. It's usually when I'm out and about and doing stuff. Like, it's a lot of the use that's been recent is sort of like self-medicating too. Some of the substances I seek out help with some of my mental aspects, not on an addiction level, but just some of my mental health stuff. And it's a fine line where it's beyond self-medicating and it starts into abuse, and then it's a problem. But it's just some of the use is, like, it starts out, it's not all bad, I control it, and then just, one thing leads to another. But a lot of the problems that, in my mind anyway, things that become problems right now because of supervision, and I have to have that accountability, and I can't, I don't have the leniency to do drugs recreationally and get away with it. That's in my mind when it becomes a problem, because normally it's like, all right, I had a hiccup, but I can still control the path. I'm very resourceful. And when I'm like, normally prior to jail, when I'm on my own, I know I have these obligations, and it doesn't matter how much money I make or how much money I waste, I meet my obligations, and it's just, I have to. I had, my kid to worry about, and it's almost like I need that pressure to thrive. When I don't have it, that can be a problem sometimes too. but I don't think it's better one way or the other as far as having people in the house or being out in a house on my own or an apartment on my own where it's just me. I think it's the lack of connections versus, for me anyway, if you don't have anybody to reach out to, or you don't do anything positive, then that probably does lead into more downtime, probably does bleed in depression or whatever. It leads into more of it. But I have a lot of peaks and valleys, in my mental health too. And a lot of it is when my medications are right, plays a big role in it too. And if I'm able to get the right medications and, whatever, then generally I'm good for longer periods of time. And then just, one day for some reason it seems like a good idea. And then, usually it snowballs. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's a one-time thing and no problem, whatever. But it's definitely something that's an ongoing battle. And I don't think that I appreciate the support, and it's definitely great when I need it. But a lot of the times I don't think it comes down to anything the community can do for me. It's when I'm going to accept it and when I'm ready to do it, basically.
You mentioned keeping the pressure on and accountability, and I'm of the belief at Dismas that I like to create, the environment that will give you every resource you could possibly need to succeed, but there also needs to be a level of accountability. I can't let you veer too far off course without intervention or at least saying something. That's my personal belief and what I try to apply and what I do. Restorative justice in that model, when you're working with somebody who you believe has it inherent in them to, meet the model and repair harm, but you see them veer off course, what's the mechanism of accountability to get people back on track?
Yeah, so it's what you just said. It's support, swoop in with support. For me personally, if they're in our housing, I go by the apartment and start mixing up and visiting them there, get specific with their goals. When people first move in, we do this goal setting sheet. And so recently I've printed out some worksheets that help people get really specific about it, because one thing I've noticed is, we have volunteers to surround with support. We can start a COSA for somebody. But what I have seen and experienced is that when people get busy, they start to feel better. And it might not feel great at first. So if we take and we apply support around someone's goal and helping support them doing something that they want to do, that they need to do, that can move their life ahead, help lead out of the darkness, so to speak, when people start doing bad. If people relapse with us, I think we allow an opportunity for them to go back to rehab, to go away and come back. And in that time while they're away, I reach out to them. And if they're connected with volunteers, I'll have a volunteer join me on a call. But we check in with them and just keep the plan alive. So where do we go from here? Because life's not going to stop. Just keep moving ahead. This is a hiccup, if you will. I've come to see it as just life, because it's like your event, as you've talked here. It sounds like I can't figure out if you were on drugs at the time you committed your crime. But I meet a lot of people who are very high functioning on drugs. And would I rather they not use drugs and do something unhealthy? Well, yeah. But at the end of the day, I guess where I approach it from, because you can't change people, is how do we best support someone in being functional in life? Functional being that you're not causing harm to others. You're able to take care of the responsibilities for your life. So you get to a point where you can take care of your housing. You get to a point where you have a job and can pay your bills. What kind of support do you need to get to that point? We're not the drug experts, so it's not like we turn a blind eye to the drugs. But in terms of accountability, that's where when I go into the apartments, I'm keeping my eye out for drug use, because that's where I need to hold someone accountable, is more around the why are you using drugs? Because remember, that's, and how's that going to negatively impact your ability to create that functional life you want? I mean, after years of doing this, when I see people start to isolate, it's because they feel disconnected from their goals, or they've lost sight of a way forward. Maybe a negative event has happened in their life that's created upheaval. And so that's where we get the support together, revisit the goals. And it comes back to that now, why I focus on the why. We're about to start doing another storytelling. I don't want to call it a program, but I bring people together to focus on storytelling for you as an individual, so that you can figure out, why are you going to get up every morning, and what's going to get you out of the house, keep you healthy, keep you sane? How are you going to get to that greater goal? And then what can we look at as your supports to say, yes, you're doing those things, or no, you're not doing them and we need to hold you accountable. And so like the what are you, well, what did you do today? Well, I went to work. I saved up this money. This is my goal. This is how you'll know I'm moving towards my goal.
Now, Lucas, this backtracks a little bit, and I passed over this thought, and I want to come back to it. You mentioned your father's passing as being a turning point, a traumatic event in your life. Can you describe for us what your childhood was like? Any other, events that come to mind that, make you who you are today? I mean, you mentioned a huge family support system. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
On the weekends, I would generally go with my father or to my grandmother's house, where 15, 20 of my cousins were usually hanging out. And it was a good time. Like they would do stuff, we'd go berry picking and swimming, fishing, hunting. And it was a very tight knit, very loving bond between everybody. Like to this day, we all still do Christmas together and holidays. We just had a big family reunion a couple months ago. A lot of those same family members, though, are also like my best friends. Like in high school, my graduating class was 11 people, counting me. So it was, most of the people in the school were related, and a lot of them to this day are my best friends too. And my whole childhood there, on my mom's side, I had just as many cousins, but the family was a little more separated. A lot of her siblings had moved around the country, and we still see them a few times a year. And my mom's really close with her father. Her mother died young, who I was close with at the time, but I was young, and didn't really affect me as much as later relatives' deaths had. But I'd say that loss of family with my father, and all those, and other family members, my grandmother, his mother as well, I was very close with. They were the rocks in my life, and I think those losses, were hard on me. But other than those losses, like, there was so much more good. And to this day, there's still, that strong family bond that was born out of struggle initially with, like, my grandmother had a hard life growing up in the Great Depression. And like, she grew up in like a legitimate gypsy family, moving all around, like nomadically struggling. And until she met my grandfather and started having, or actually she had met another man before him when she was like 16 and had kids. And then she got with my grandfather a few years later. But all of her children were raised by my grandfather, and to this day I are part of that same family I spoke of, and that created just that tight bond, and it was just instilled in us, and it still is. That support is there if you want it, but and I don't know, I'm getting off track, I guess, but it
No, I mean, you're saying exactly what I'm trying to get at. Is I think we both, Jonathan and I, try to accomplish this. We want people, the community, to see our clientele, our population, our residents, not even as residents, not just humans. I mean, our folks, they had holidays and families and first days of school and first day at work and played sports. There's so much more to the story than that bad day, the big event. I mean, would you agree?
Yeah. My goal is for people to just see them as community and be, it's the markers of success. One of our residents right now, I've had people stop down and be like, it's been great having him living at this apartment. He's really built community for this whole building where he's living at in one of our apartments. And that to me is like, what greater marker of success? Or when someone says, there's a company that employs a number of our residents, and they will stop in completely unbidden without me reaching out and thank us for connecting them with someone who's living in one of our apartments. And it's like you just said, Jeff, when people just see him as community members, like, it's just Lucas. Oh, but it's not just Lucas. When people see Lucas and they're like, man, that guy is like one of the nicest people. He always says hi. Or the story that I'm sure probably comes up at Dismas House. I bet there's a volunteer who talked to you at some point that that maybe you've already talked to, who's now got the Lucas story about this guy at Dismas House. I remember when he was so quiet, he wouldn't even, engage with us. And now he talks to us, or, that's one of the things too.
Get him out on a camping trip. He is hilarious. Oh, he was killing me. I couldn't believe it. This guy that didn't say two words for the first 6 months he was here was telling these stories, and I was just rolling. It was amazing.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the, another thing, we share some volunteers and volunteers of mine who've come back from the camping trip. And to hear them talk about the camping trip, it's just this great event where camaraderie, esprit de corps, like for some of the volunteers, sometimes it's the first time they've done anything like play paintball or do anything like that. So that's why I say I wouldn't narrow the services we have. I wouldn't go with strictly scattered site or strictly congregate. I think you keep what we have and we just look at how do we better blend what we have to create that community and reach that point where, yeah, it's just a community member. And people are grateful to have us here, to have the housing.
Okay, well, Jonathan, Lucas, thank you very much for being here. I think we had an excellent conversation, and thank you for listening to another episode of Going to Dismas.
Thank you for listening to this Jam podcast. If you have found this program interesting and would like to find more Upper Valley content or learn how to produce your own media, please visit us at uvjam.org. That's uvjam.org.